They smiled, fined, and warned me relentlessly until paperwork, cameras, and quiet persistence turned their gated paradise into a cautionary tale about prejudice, power, and consequences. Noisy boards everywhere watching. Before starting from beginning, please subscribe the channel for more. The house had been my victory, a sunlit corner property with a magnolia tree out front, a modest porch, and just enough space to breathe after years of renting. The neighborhood sold itself as orderly and peaceful, wrapped in the familiar promise of safety, property values, and pride. I believed in those things too. I believed I had earned my place there. From the moment the moving truck left, the attention began. It came dressed as friendliness at first, the kind that hovered too long and asked questions already answered. I noticed how often people slowed down when passing my driveway, how clipboards appeared during my first week, how notes materialized on my door citing obscure sections of HOA bylaws. The grass was apparently a quarter-inch too tall, the trash bin allegedly visible for an extra hour, the mailbox paint too glossy, too noticeable, too something. None of it seemed serious alone. Together, it formed a pattern that tightened like a net. The HOA newsletters arrived weekly, heavy with reminders about conformity and consequences. Somewhere between announcements about pool hours and parking restrictions, there were thinly veiled warnings about maintaining neighborhood standards. The language was neutral, but the timing never was. Each letter followed some minor, harmless thing about my home that differed from the unspoken norm. I was new, and I was black, and that distinction seemed to echo louder than the sound of my lawnmower. What unsettled me most was the way concern was weaponized. Complaints were framed as community care, as protecting investments, as ensuring everyone belonged. Yet belonging felt conditional, monitored, and fragile. The HOA president, a woman with an immovable smile and an impressive collection of binders, made herself a frequent presence near my property. Her gaze lingered, her notes multiplied, her visits increased under the guise of enforcement. I adjusted, I complied, I measured my lawn with a ruler, I repainted trim that didn't need paint, I installed motion lights not for safety, but to ensure visibility. Still, the notices continued. The fines escalated from warnings to fees, always justified by selective interpretations of rules rarely applied elsewhere. Neighbors watched, some with curiosity, others with relief that the scrutiny was aimed somewhere else. A few offered sympathetic nods, but no one intervened. Silence, I learned quickly, was another form of participation. The coded comments began circulating through official channels, recorded in meeting minutes and committee summaries. References to cultural fit, mentions of maintaining the neighborhood's character, concerns about unfamiliar aesthetics. None of it explicitly named race, but all of it leaned in that direction with practiced ease. What they didn't realize was that I had stopped reacting emotionally and started paying attention strategically. I kept every letter. I photographed every notice taped to my door. I saved emails, dated envelopes, and logged times. I noticed how other homes violated the same rules without consequence. I noticed how enforcement clustered around me, how consistency dissolved in my absence and reappeared when I returned. The HOA meetings were public, and I attended quietly, sitting in the back, listening. I watched how the board spoke about compliance and values, how their eyes flicked toward me when certain topics arose. I took notes. I recorded nothing yet, but I memorized tone, phrasing, and intent. The neighborhood that had promised peace was becoming a performance, and I was being cast as the problem. Still, I did not confront. I did not escalate. I let the pressure build while I gathered weight in documentation. Each fine paid was a receipt, each warning was evidence, each smile that preceded a sanction became another thread in a growing tapestry. By the end of the first year, the HOA had issued more notices to my address than to any other property on the block. That statistic alone told a story, but I knew it would need context, structure, and undeniable clarity to matter. The breaking point came quietly, disguised as routine enforcement, a complaint filed without warning, citing a violation I could prove never existed. It arrived with an urgency that suggested confidence, the kind that comes from believing no one will push back. I placed the letter into a folder already thick with proof, and realized the story was no longer just about my house, it was about the system that felt entitled to decide who belonged. And that was when I stopped preparing to endure, and started preparing to respond. The next chapter would not be about survival. It would be about exposure. The shift was subtle, but it changed everything. I stopped trying to appease the HOA and focused entirely on accuracy. Every interaction became a data point. Every inspection was documented from multiple angles. I installed security cameras that captured not just my property, but the frequency and timing of visits from enforcement representatives. Patterns emerged quickly once I looked at them without denial. The same board member appeared repeatedly, often outside of scheduled inspection windows. Notices referenced rules that had been amended years earlier, selectively revived only when convenient. Fines were calculated inconsistently, rounded up when applied to me and rounded down elsewhere. It was no longer plausible deniability, it was targeted governance. I began requesting records, using the HOA's own bylaws to access enforcement logs, complaint histories, and internal correspondence. The process irritated the board. Delays increased, responses grew defensive, but compliance was mandatory, and each document they released added clarity. What I found was damning. Complaints about my home often originated from the same small group, recycled through different channels to appear widespread. Language used in internal notes mirrored the coded phrasing from public newsletters, but with less restraint. Concerns about maintaining a certain atmosphere, comments about standing out, notes questioning whether I understood community expectations. Still no explicit slurs, still no outright admissions, but enough to establish intent when paired with enforcement disparity. I organized everything chronologically, color-coded, and cross-referenced. I consulted professionals quietly, sharing facts without embellishment. Their reactions confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't just unfair, it was actionable. The HOA sensed the change before I made any formal move. Inspections slowed, then resumed with renewed intensity. A violation was issued for something that had existed unchanged for months. Another fine followed, larger than the last. The pressure tactic was clear: overwhelm, exhaust, and discourage. Instead, it fortified my resolve. I filed a formal dispute, attaching evidence that contradicted each claim. I cited specific bylaw sections, historical enforcement records, and photographic proof. I requested a hearing, knowing it would be documented. The board's response was curt, procedural, and increasingly cautious. At the hearing, I said nothing unnecessary. I presented facts. I submitted exhibits. I let their own documents speak louder than any emotion could. The room shifted as the weight of evidence settled. What had been framed as routine enforcement now looked like something else entirely. Afterward, the atmosphere changed. Notices stopped arriving. Emails went unanswered. The silence was strategic, but it came too late. I expanded my reach carefully. I contacted local fair housing organizations and civil rights advocates, sharing my documentation. Their interest was immediate.
What I had experienced was not isolated, it was familiar. My records provided something rare, proof detailed enough to withstand scrutiny. The story began to move beyond the neighborhood. Journalists reached out after public records requests revealed unusual enforcement patterns. Social media picked up fragments, then threads. The HOA attempted damage control through vague statements about commitment to inclusion, but the timing betrayed them. Neighbors who had remained silent started asking questions. Some apologized privately, others distanced themselves. The board held emergency meetings, minutes redacted heavily, decisions deferred. Insurance providers were notified, attorneys were consulted. Through it all, I remained still and meticulous. The backlash grew not because I shouted, but because I documented, because I understood that systems collapse when forced to confront their own reflections. The HOA's authority relied on the assumption that no one would challenge it with precision. That assumption was wrong. By the time a formal investigation was announced, the narrative had shifted completely. This was no longer about a homeowner failing to comply. It was about an organization failing to govern fairly. And as the spotlight intensified, the neighborhood learned what happens when quiet persistence meets undeniable truth. The final chapter would not be about victory alone. It would be about accountability and the cost of underestimating the woman they thought would never fight back.
The investigation unfolded with the slow inevitability of something long overdue. Requests for information multiplied, deadlines tightened, and explanations grew thinner. The HOA's carefully curated image began to crack under the weight of its own records. What had once been dismissed as routine governance was now scrutinized as a pattern of discrimination. Auditors compared enforcement histories across the neighborhood. The disparity was impossible to ignore. Properties with identical or worse violations had gone unpenalized for years. Only one address showed consistent, escalating enforcement. Only one homeowner had been subjected to repeated scrutiny without relief. Mine. The board attempted restructuring mid-investigation, resignations framed as personal decisions rather than accountability. New faces were introduced, but the damage was already done. Public trust eroded as details surfaced through official channels and media coverage. The language they had used, once obscured by bureaucracy, was now contextualized and condemned. Legal consequences followed methodically. Fines issued against me were refunded with interest. Policies were revised under supervision. Mandatory training was imposed. The HOA's insurance premiums skyrocketed, a quiet but effective penalty. Several board members were barred from future leadership roles within similar organizations. The neighborhood changed in tone. Yard signs disappeared. Committees dissolved. The obsessive enforcement culture faded, replaced by something closer to indifference. For the first time since moving in, I felt unobserved. But the most significant shift was internal. I no longer measured my lawn with fear. I no longer checked my mailbox expecting reprimand. The house returned to being a home, not a battleground. The magnolia bloomed without commentary. The porch became a place of rest again. People who had once avoided eye contact now offered greetings, some awkward, some sincere. A few admitted they had seen what was happening but hadn't known how to intervene. I accepted what felt genuine and released the rest. The story continued circulating online, reshaped into cautionary content and commentary. It resonated because it was familiar to many and uncomfortable to those who benefited from silence. It reminded viewers that discrimination often wears professional attire and speaks in procedural language. I never sought to become a symbol. I wanted fairness, peace, and the right to exist without constant justification. What I gained instead was a lesson in power dynamics and the effectiveness of preparation over confrontation. The HOA still exists, quieter now, constrained by oversight and awareness. The neighborhood remains intact, but its mythology has changed. It is no longer just a place of manicured lawns and strict rules. It is a reminder that order without equity is just control. As for me, I stayed, not out of defiance, but out of belonging reclaimed. I planted another tree in the yard, its roots spreading slowly, deliberately, a living testament to permanence. They once believed I was temporary, out of place, and easily corrected. They were wrong on every count. The story ended not with raised voices or dramatic exits, but with something far more enduring: accountability, and the quiet understanding that some women, when pushed, will document, endure, and ultimately dismantle the very systems that sought to erase them.